Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, June the 11th, 2025. Today there is a full moon in Sagittarius. And in this video, I want to look at what this full moon might mean. And I also want to consider a few people who this full moon might impact. For example, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, also Gavin Newsom, the Governor of California. It's also possible that the full moon might have an impact on the British King, King Charles III. But before I look at this full moon, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, Wednesday, June the 11th. And here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time, June the 11th. So here it is. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And looking at the chart for today, we see that the moon is indeed in Sagittarius, and so wherever we are, this is where it's going to be. And the moon has been in Sagittarius for a couple of days. And, we can say the usual thing about moon in Sagittarius. Moon is in a fire sign. It can be very open. It can be very honest. Can be a bit blunt. And that may say something about today. Perhaps it is a day for being honest, for, telling people, what's on our mind. After all, the moon in Sagittarius does make a trine to Mars in Leo. That is a very fiery trine. And it really might stir things up. But what really matters is the fact that the moon is making an opposition to the sun. And there's the sun at 20 degrees Gemini, 20 degrees 29 Gemini at noon New York time. And so moon opposition sun, well, of course there's going to be a Sagittarius moon every year. And this moon is about talking, communicating, realizations. It's always about realizations. Every full moon is about a realization, but this realization is about maybe we're starting to understand something. The sun in Gemini, is about thinking about things, not necessarily in a especially deep way, but the facts and the realizations build up. And then the moon in Sagittarius comes along and maybe things will suddenly come together. That's how moon in Sagittarius can work. That's indeed how the fire signs can work. Things that appear to be disconnected suddenly click, and it's all completely obvious. And it can happen in a moment. And that might be how the full moon works out. It's neutral. It could be a good realization, it could be a bad realization. But whatever the realization is, it's not something that we should walk away from. And it could be a sort of moment of truth. Also, the full moon, the moon moves from being waxing to being waning. And generally the waxing moon is more fortunate than the waning moon. And so we had a developing lunar cycle, but now the lunar cycle has reached peak, and we now have to sort of deal with the consequences. And also there might be a feeling of disintegration in the last 2 weeks of the lunar cycle. It's not a disintegration that we ourselves need to be worried about, but it's still very much there. Now, one thing I said is that, the moon is making a trine to Mars. Well, in fact, if you use Chiron, there's actually a grand trine in fire signs, because we've got moon trine Mars, we've got moon trine Chiron, we've got Mars is just separating from a trine to Chiron. So that grand trine, may be rather special. It may encourage some of us to be different, to perhaps be a maverick. I know I overuse that word when talking about Chiron, but it is a word that comes up, and it's about doing things differently and just not wanting to do what everyone else does, and also perhaps wanting to do something that attracts attention. It's very obvious, and people stop what they're doing, and they have to question what they're doing, and they don't like to question what they're doing. They wanted everything to just run as normal, but Moon trine Chiron, Mars trine Chiron, that's not good enough. People have to do things differently, and there are some people who are going to want to take a stand. Maybe that person is you. If you don't feel you want to take a stand, you feel you want to do what everyone else is doing, then don't be surprised if someone rocks the boat. And additionally, with this Moon Chiron Mars grand trine, it might say something about compassion, having strong feelings about the way things are going, strong feelings about injustice, whether it's on a collective basis or whether it's about an individual. So that could be how this this grand trine works. And then we have got Mercury making a sextile to Venus. So Mercury is at 5 Cancer and Venus is at 5 Taurus, so they're in sextile to one another. And as far as I'm concerned, that sextile is pretty good. I mean, for a start, a sextile is a good aspect. Also, Mercury Venus, when they come together, can be creative, can be communicative, can also be very open about what they are doing. And so whatever you're doing, whatever your projects are, now might be the time to talk about it. Especially when we've got a full moon, because a full moon is about disclosure. It's about things coming out into the open, and perhaps you can use the energy of the full moon to explain why what you are doing, what you are trying to achieve, is important. And there's a good chance that people will listen to you. I mean, Venus is in Taurus, Mercury in Cancer. Okay, you might say, well, Mercury's in Cancer. It doesn't talk much when Mercury's in Cancer. But Mercury is very sensitive in Cancer. And so Mercury in Cancer, knows what to say and what not to say, and knows how to present the information and really how to put yourself in the best possible light. And remember, the moon is a communication planet. It is in Sagittarius. So if we've got something to say, there shouldn't be too many problems. So that's the picture in set for New York. Now, I did say that the moon is in Sagittarius. Now, in an American context, well, the moon goes into Capricorn tomorrow, London time, 2:55, which would be 2:55 in the morning, 5 to 3 in the morning. So if you are in the Americas, then this evening, Wednesday evening, the moon actually changes sign. The moon moves into Capricorn, and that is a very different energy. The moon sort of calms things down, and it may not be so bad. The moon will then start applying to a trine to Venus. We'll be making a square to Saturn and Neptune. So if you are in the Americas, then this evening things might slow down, and there may be certain issues you have to deal with because the moon is making that square to Saturn. But for most of the day, the moon is in Sagittarius, even if you are in the Americas. Now, if you are in Australia and New Zealand or East Asia, here is a chart for noon Sydney time, and the moon is earlier in the sign. It's at 17 Sagittarius. It's applying to the full moon. The full moon is really dominating the day. The full moon will be exact, probably something like sort of late afternoon off the top of my head. And so there is that build up to the full moon that you're experiencing if you are in Australia or New Zealand, and that will indeed dominate the day. That moon trine Mars I was talking about, that might be more about tomorrow or very late today, but I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between the experience of those of you in the Americas and those of you in Australasia. The moon is still in Sagittarius, and there is still a full moon feel to the day. And then there is the heliocentric chart, with the sun at the center of the solar system, and the T-square involving Mars, Neptune and Jupiter is still very much in view, and Mars has made the opposition to Neptune, and it's now moving towards a square to Jupiter. And so you could say that Mars is kind of aspecting the Jupiter-Neptune, the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint, and that does matter because it is a T-square, and so there could be real optimism to that T-square. Jupiter-Neptune, very optimistic pair. It can be about having faith that something is going to work, and that might say something about how Mars is operating. Mars on the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. By the way, let me just see what Reinhold Ebertin says about Mars on the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint, because I do associate Jupiter-Neptune with, it does have a religious feel to it. It is about faith, but it can be about wishful thinking, putting too much energy into something which really can't work out. And so, Ebertin says about Jupiter-Neptune, when he talks about the general principle of the Jupiter-Neptune pair, he says it's apparent happiness speculation. And he says of Mars on the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint, he says, unreliability, proneness to irresponsible acting, the tendency to rely on others, the act of speculating, the desire to realize plans without prospect. So that was pretty much what I was suggesting. So we must be careful about putting energy into something which just can't happen. And it's not just us. It may be other people. It may be groups of people. It may be speculations about how wonderful things could be if only. And so that could be a problem with Mars on the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. I think actually it's a sesquiquadrate to the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. So it's important to be very grounded, and I think that is the main thing going on. Mars is also actually making a trine to Pluto. So Mars trine Pluto, it's quite a powerful aspect, but it's a trine. So provided we've got our facts right, and provided we are, very grounded with that Mars trine Pluto, maybe despite everything, we can get our way. Oh, and Jupiter is also quincunx Pluto, so we want things to be better. We really do. We do want things to be better. Everyone wants things to be better, but is it possible? So that's the heliocentric view, and now I want to consider things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, June the 11th, 2025. Aries. Aries, there are things going on. You don't want to just stay on the sidelines. You want to be in the center of things, and you're also a real individual at the moment. You're not interested in just following the crowd, doing what everyone expects. Yeah, you want to be different, and you have your own perspective, and people need to know about it, if necessary. And the reason is, the moon. Okay, for one thing, the moon is in Sagittarius. That's a great place for the moon to be, especially if you're an Aries. It brightens things up, creates possibilities, and you do not want to limit yourself. You want to always go further. You want to take things to the furthest boundary that you can. I mean, in the end, you will hit a brick wall if we keep moving in the same direction, but it's going to take a long time before you actually hit the fence. And so, don't restrict yourself. And if there's something you really feel you want to do because it inspires you, then Aries, I would suggest that you go and do it. And you don't be afraid of getting adverse attention. The moon is making a trine to Chiron. Mars is making a trine to Chiron. Okay, Mars was making a trine to Chiron yesterday and the day before, and you could say, well, that Mars trine Chiron is in the past, but the moon is bringing it all together. And we've got a grand trine in fire signs: moon in Sagittarius, Mars in Leo, Chiron in Aries. And so this is a time, Aries, when you might have to take a stand. You have to be very clear about what you believe in, and there could be a moment of realization. It's not just that we've got a grand trine in fire signs involving Mars, which is your ruler. We also have a full moon, and this full moon allows you to just suddenly see things for the way they are. You've been working on it, you've been developing, you've been thinking, you've been building a picture, perhaps over the last couple of weeks, perhaps since the new moon on May the 27th, but now with the full moon, it's all there in front of you. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to take action. Just because you see something doesn't necessarily mean that you do anything. You may just look and say, well, that's interesting, and not do anything. I mean, that is a possibility. But fundamentally, you will know, perhaps in an instant, that some kind of action is required, and that you have to take things further. And Aries, that's something you can do. And to begin with, that might be done in a slightly chaotic way. You're not quite sure where it's going to end up, but you have to do something. Though at some stage, particularly if you're in the Americas, things will start to make sense. This evening, moon goes into Capricorn if you're in the Americas. Okay, tomorrow it'll be in Capricorn if you're not in the Americas. So the moon will eventually go into Capricorn, and that is going to make you more grounded. But for the moment, there are definitely things you want to do, and it's not a day for just doing nothing. It's a day for making an impact, but also for listening. You don't have to spend all day listening, but there are people who've got something to say, and it could be very grounding. And so don't be insensitive. I mean, there's no need to be insensitive. And also, you might think, if you spend too much time listening to another person, then your freedom of action, might be curtailed. But that's not necessarily the case. Just a bit of time listening to what someone says, especially if that person is important to you. And if you're, for example, in a relationship or a partnership with them, give them some space, because they've got their own views, and it would perhaps be in your interests to know what those views actually are. And it could actually be very encouraging if you give someone an opportunity to have an influence on you. Then you might actually be pleasantly surprised. Taurus. Taurus, there are several things going on today. Your first impulse might be to think that today is just too complicated, that there are just too many things going on, and you might then feel that you don't want to get involved because you just don't understand it. And So some Taurians, might find that that they just want to disappear and work things out, in their own way, and or even not do any working out, just lay low. I don't think though that is the right approach. If something is going on that you don't understand, then don't panic. It just might take you time, and don't fall into the trap of thinking that you are somehow different. That also that things can't really be summed up properly. At least you can't sum them up properly. So, why bother? And, just because you start the day being a bit sluggish thinking, your thinking could be sluggish. You might not want to move quickly enough, and might not want to adjust to changing realities. It's so easy to think that you shouldn't be doing anything, but that would be a waste, because you are in a position, Taurus, where you can understand, and you can understand at a very deep level, and you just have to take things at your own pace. You don't have to take on board everything happening around you. Just decide what matters, and perhaps you can split things up into chunks, and that way you can start making sense of things. And I think that at a certain stage, there will be a moment where it does where it does become clear, where you do know what's happening. And of course, there is a full moon today, and this full moon is across the finance axis of your chart. Sun in Gemini, Moon in Sagittarius, and so for some Taurians, it might be a time where you have a good understanding of what matters financially. You've been trying to make sense of it for some time, since the end of May, and at times you might have been in denial, but right now the truth is clear, and it's also clear what other people want and what other people's motives are. So if you have been worrying or wondering what someone else is planning, what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing, now it's becoming clear. And it's quite possible that a lot of people are motivated by money. They can say what they like. They can claim they're doing it for the common good, but it's almost certainly not true. I mean, everyone's got an interest, haven't they? Pure unselfish action is actually very rare, and as a Taurian, you can understand this. You can understand the basics of it all, and you just have to keep your eyes open. Now, that sounds a bit grim, but we have to look at what else is going on today, and there is a sextile between Mercury and Venus, and I think that this Mercury-Venus sextile could actually be really useful. And it being a sextile, it's a fortunate aspect. Venus is in Taurus, of course. Venus is your ruler. It's in the sign of its rulership, it's in its own sign, and so with Mercury sextile Venus, in spite of your uncertainty, in spite of there apparently being a lot of things that are very complicated, in spite of all that, you can cut through it all, and you can make yourself very clear. You might say something, and to begin with, you don't feel that you know what you're saying. You might think you're going to make a fool of yourself, but if you just take it slowly, get the words out, get the thoughts out, then you'll make a really good impression. And it might actually be a time, Taurus, to tell people what is important to you, because there are things that you're very good at, you're very good at, but sometimes you feel unappreciated. But now with this Mercury sextile Venus, you can be clearer, and you can tell people what matters to you, and you'll be able to do this in a way that is very compelling. And just take your time to get through the narrative, and people will understand, and indeed you can be understood. And also, however difficult things are, however complex things are, Taurus, it really is worth making effort, because I think in the end you can make sense of it all. Gemini, there is a full moon today, and this full moon is across the main axis of your chart. You've got Sun in Gemini, and you've got Moon in Sagittarius. So this full moon, could be important. And as with all full moons, it can be about a realization. Something just makes sense to you. It hadn't made sense to you in the past, but now everything is clear. And the question is, once you see the truth, the reality of the situation, what do you do? I mean, it may be, Gemini, that you decide to do nothing, and that would be a shame. That's always the problem about self-development and awareness. We can become as aware as we like. We can really understand every detail of our childhood and where we're going wrong, and still we just do the same old things. So that is a possibility, and one should never estimate the power of stagnation. Yet, this full moon, does allow you to see the truth about yourself, and also the truth about other people. You're seeing people in a particular way. You've made assumptions about them. Those assumptions could have been positive, they could have been negative, they could have been overly pessimistic or overly optimistic. And now with this full moon, you can start to see these assumptions, in a new way, and the truth is right there in front of you. And so, ideally, this full moon could represent a change in certain relationships, and it may be a change for the better. And if you're in a relatively new relationship or partnership, the full moon might represent a change, and you might realize that things have reached a certain point where they just can't go on like this for much longer. And the sooner there is a change, whatever that change might be, the better. And also, Gemini, your ability to get on with people today is actually very good. You know how to bring people together, and you know how to make your introductions. And so if there's someone you want to talk to, even if they're a complete stranger, you'll know what to say, you'll know what to do. And I think in many cases there'll be something about you, Gemini, that really isn't threatening. You will be an easy person to get on with. And additionally, Gemini, we have a sextile between Mercury and Venus. So Mercury Venus sextile, that is a very good reason why your various relationships should work well. And there is the possibility here of just being able to communicate in an easy way, and even to be able to communicate about difficult subjects. For example, money. So if you want to talk about money, you feel that there's a financial issue that needs to be brought out into the open, then I really think you can. So Gemini, be free and open, and tell people what's on your mind, tell people what's bothering you. I mean, it may not necessarily be anything negative. You could actually have quite a positive conversation about money, and be talking about ways in which financial matters could be improved. But, money aside, you are actually relatively sensitive today. And part of that is to do with the fact that Mercury, your ruler, is in Cancer. And so the average Gemini is going to be more sensitive and nuanced than usual, be able to look at the subtleties, realize that nothing is absolutely straightforward, but be able to work around it and be able to read the cues. Just because someone is hiding something doesn't mean to say that you can't pick up on it. You can really start to understand, what is unspoken. So I think that looks really very useful. And additionally, Moon is trine Mars, and Moon is moving through Sagittarius, your opposite sign. So there is actually something about you that is quite exciting in terms of what you say, and if you want, you can actually be very original. So Gemini, in general, it looks like being a reasonably good day. Cancer, you would like to do things in a particular way, and you don't really want to be told, and you know how things work. You feel very sure about that, and so you just want to, get on with it, and you don't really feel that you need to be disturbed. You know what needs to be done, and that's great, but you shouldn't necessarily think that everything is clear. There is a full moon today, and this full moon might reveal something to you that you hadn't expected. You assumed that everything was going to work in a particular way. You assumed that your day was going to be structured in a way that was relatively easy and straightforward. But something comes up, and you have to make an adjustment. Something that had been hidden, maybe, or you had been even hiding it from yourself. You didn't want to think about it, and now you realize actually you do have to think about it, and that could be annoying, Cancer. But I wouldn't worry about it. You can take it in your stride. A small change of plan, won't cause too much damage, and is not going to upset your sensibilities too much. And additionally, Cancer, we have a trine between the Moon and Mars. In fact, we've got a grand trine. Moon trine Mars, Moon trine Chiron even. And this trine presents the day with a different emphasis. It is about what you feel you need to do, maybe in a way that is charitable, or you have to take a stand on something. Taking a stand on something which is not necessarily essential to your own vital interests. And it could be that you see something that isn't right and you need to say something about it, or you need to change something, because if you don't change it, someone else might be disadvantaged, or they might even suffer. And if you want to go out of your way to help another person, Moon is making a trine to Chiron, someone who you feel is in need, then at the very least it's going to make you feel good about yourself. But it may be just something that you actually feel that you have to do. And additionally, Mercury is now in Cancer. Of course, Jupiter is now in Cancer. That has created a big change, and Mercury is making a trine to Venus, and so Mercury in Cancer is making a trine to Venus in Taurus, So, that's a very pleasant aspect. And it suggests to me that you can really get people on board with whatever is important to you. I mean, your immediate impulse is to take things slowly and maybe to be quite reserved. But I don't actually think that that is necessary. I think that actually you can be quite forceful, but without actually appearing forceful. And people will just respect you because you'll have a certain gravitas about you. And you're further strengthened, by the way. One thing I maybe hadn't pointed out in the last couple of videos is that the moon is actually making a mutual reception to Jupiter. Jupiter is in your sign. The moon is in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign. And so, every time now, for the next 13 months until the end of July. Sorry, end of June 2026. So for the next 13 months, or 12 and a half months almost, every time the moon moves into Sagittarius, it will be in mutual reception to Jupiter. And that's really good if you're a Cancerian. I think that, that's a real way in which, you can benefit from Jupiter moving into Cancer. The moon is now really working for you. Moon in Sagittarius, very often for a Cancerian, it can be difficult. It can be a bit boring. Because Jupiter, Cancer and Sagittarius are very different signs, and when the moon is in Sagittarius, you might find yourself having to do things you don't want to do, and it might be tedious. But now, between now and the end of June 2026, every time the moon is in Sagittarius, it works in your favor. It's an opportunity to really make things happen, and it emphasizes the point that Jupiter moving into Gemini for you is really good news. It really allows you to to be yourself, to express yourself, and to get the respect and support that you deserve. Leo, today you, in one sense, you're feeling good. There is a grand trine in fire signs if you count Chiron. So we've got Mars is in Leo, and Moon is in Sagittarius. Chiron is in Aries. So that's working for you. And Mars in Leo is starting to move towards Regulus, the royal star. And so there's certainly a lot of action at the moment, and you're not necessarily going to want to stay in one place because there are so many things to do, and you can be very vibrant, and also you can be a bonus in other people's lives, with the moon making that trine to Chiron, because you have a different view, and you are aware that it's not just about you. It is also about other people, and you're going to be quite sensitive to what's going on in other people's lives, and you may at times feel that you want to take a stand for another person, and so that's all well and good, and it does seem to be quite an exciting day. However, there is some possibility that you focus on the wrong things. Things distract you, things which may not always be very pleasant, but they just grab your attention, and you can't get them out of your mind, and you want to do something about it. And it might be a question of knowing too much. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, and if we are not aware that something is going on that might possibly be bad, then we don't do anything about it, and the problem passes, and it's all fine, and we never know anything about it. But if we do become aware, then we might feel what we absolutely have to take action. And if you take action, or you're planning on taking action today, with a mindset of being troubled. If you're feeling troubled and you feel this is not what you want to do, but you're going to do it anyway, if you have that kind of attitude, maybe you shouldn't do it, because there is a danger of overreaction, and overreacting to things which really don't deserve your attention. And if you do focus too much energy on them, it could be worse than useless. It could actually make things very difficult for you, and it might even create a new set of problems. So don't be too impulsive. And if you're feeling bad about something, and if you kind of know in your heart of hearts that this isn't the right thing to be doing, but you kind of do it anyway, then really try to step back. And probably the most important aspect of the day is a full moon. It is a full moon day, and of course, by definition, the full moon has an impact on the sun, which is your ruler, because the moon is opposition the sun. And so we've got moon in Sagittarius opposition the sun in Gemini. How might we see that? Well, it might be about your own individuality, and to what extent are you actually prepared to compromise? There are things that are important to you, and if you engage too much with other people and you tell people what you're doing and people are interested in what you're doing, then you might find that your creativity gets watered down to nothing until it just becomes dross, and that's not what you want. On the other hand, with the full moon, it is saying that the things that are important to you might also have to be important to the group, to the collective, and you have to balance that without compromising your individuality. You can't do things completely on your own, but on the other hand, if you totally give in to outside pressure, you've got nothing. And so really try to get the balance right. And also, Leo, there are things you might just pick up on. You notice and you hear things, and you're not quite sure whether they're important. Are they trivial, or do they really matter? And it might be just in conversation you're told something, and it's easy to forget, but it's relevant. It could be very, very relevant. It could be relevant to yourself and to your ambitions. So it's a good idea to remember and to write things down, but to do it in quite a subtle way. Don't just take out a big notebook if you're talking to someone and just write what they're saying down, but just take a mental note. And when you have an opportunity, perhaps you can put it down on paper, because there's information coming your way right now that I do think that you can benefit from. And it may be that at the moment you have the charm to get people to be open, and they tell you things, and you can benefit from them. Or it may be that it's a warning, and you it's not that you have to do anything today. It's just you have to take some notes, and it might be important in the near future. Virgo, it's quite possible that today you don't really want to do much. It's all been rather exhausting, and why bother? And that might be your inclination. It might actually have been your inclination, for the last couple of days. But we do have a full moon, and this full moon in Sagittarius, and this full moon for you, Virgo, could actually be quite challenging. You know that there are things you want to do, and there are certainly things you don't want to do, but there's pressure. There's outside pressure, and the question is, how do you actually deal with this outside pressure? Do you ignore it? Well, if you do ignore it, I think there'd be cause for regret. So try to understand what people are saying, and that's especially the case if you've got a job. Do listen to what employers and others, workmates, are saying to you, and even if you don't like what you're hearing, and it could actually be rather challenging, and it's a challenge that you have to deal with, and it is about the full moon. And the full moon, additionally, could be talking about the sort of how do they call it, the sort of the work home balance, the work life balance. How much emphasis do you put into your ambitions? But what about yourself? What about your family? What about security concerns? And so that might be how the full moon actually works. But the full moon can be about realization, and you might have an understanding now about how much emphasis you want to give to your ambitions, and perhaps to your job or your work, and also what is important, and why are you doing what you are doing. And that's always an important question if you are a Virgo. Now, one aspect that we do have today, which I think could work in your favor, is a sextile between Mercury and Venus. And this Mercury-Venus does actually allow you to come over in a really very pleasant way. You'll lose your rough edges, and you'll be able to speak in a way that is sensitive and is sympathetic, and it's also interesting. You can come over as being someone who's really got something to offer, who has sort of interesting ideas, and people will listen. And this might be an opportunity to really look at your social life. And Jupiter has just gone into Cancer, and I do think that Jupiter moving into Cancer could potentially be good for social activities. And now with Mercury also in Cancer, making that sextile to Venus, you may start to see the benefits of certain other people, and do try to make an effort to get on with new people, because you are socially very effective today. Even if you've got your own reservations, I think you do have reservations. I think, as I said at the beginning of this piece, I think part of you would like to be doing nothing and just not have to engage with anything going on. But if you make the effort to reach out, be sociable, be nice, I think that your efforts will be reciprocated and rewarded. Libra, things are moving. You want to move. Movement really does matter. You don't want to be in one place, and variety does matter to you. I mean, and so by all means, give yourself that variety. I mean, the moon is making a trine to Mars, and so with that moon trine Mars, you can be in lots of different places without necessarily having to travel very far. It's just constant activity, and you may be able to benefit from other people. Other people will be relatively exciting, and I think that from a relationship perspective, moon trine Mars indicates that there's at least one person who you can get on well with, and you can say things which will be appreciated. I mean, you might have your doubts. You might worry that people aren't going to take you seriously, but you shouldn't have these doubts. Just live for the moment, and you don't be too self-conscious. Now, we do have a full moon at the moment, and the full moon is across an axis of your chart which could be connected with travel and communication. And it is potentially a challenge. And the question is, are you thinking about the lower or the higher? It's easy to just concentrate on lots of small things, but where is it all going? Where is the larger picture? And hopefully, while Jupiter had been moving through Gemini, Jupiter's obviously no longer in Gemini, but while Jupiter was moving through Gemini, you had a chance to really start to understand what was important to you and what you believed in. And now you've got this full moon, the question of your beliefs is maybe for the first time being challenged. How are your beliefs dealing with the real world? And so that might be how the full moon works. But I don't think that this full moon is necessarily going to affect you in a major way. I don't think it's anything that you need to worry about. And additionally, Jupiter is now in Cancer. It's been in Cancer for a couple of days. But one thing perhaps I didn't mention about Jupiter moving into Cancer, when the moon is in Sagittarius, because it does matter, the relationship between the moon and Jupiter now, because the moon and Jupiter are in mutual reception. Moon is in Sagittarius, Jupiter's in Cancer. They're in each other's sign. And Jupiter is in a section of your chart which is connected with ambition and can be about your work, where you want to go. And now that the moon is in Sagittarius and it's in late Sagittarius, it will move into Capricorn if you're in the Americas this evening. But when the moon is in Sagittarius, it's also it does have this special relationship with Jupiter, and it is a time, and when you really can, tell everyone what's on your mind, and you can articulate to yourself, what you want and what is important to you, and in most cases, people are going to listen. So that's a broad picture for Libra. I think it's just important to give yourself some variety, but at the same time, whatever you encounter today, ask yourself, how does it match with your own belief system? Is it a challenge to your belief system, or have you now worked things out? While Jupiter was moving in Gemini, are you now more resilient to things happening that you don't understand or that you haven't seen before? Because maybe you've actually created a structure for dealing with unexpected events, or perhaps you've created a script. Of course, scripts are often a problem. I mean, if you've got a script, then you don't really think it through. You just follow the script. But it's not a time for following the script, Libra. So anyway, that's it. Probably a little bit confusing for Libra here. I mean, there are many directions in which you could go in, and so maybe you don't have to worry too much about the astrology. Just make sure that you have a busy day. Scorpio, there is a full moon today, and this full moon could have a financial dimension. I mean, the moon is in Sagittarius, the sign following Scorpio, and it's making an opposition to the sun. So certain financial matters may be reaching some kind of conclusion where you start to realize what the truth of the matter is. And in terms of money, that's what you should be doing, and you should always be looking for the financial dimension, the financial element, which may be hidden. Very often people try to pretend that there is no financial dimension, that money doesn't matter. We can't take it with us. Let's not worry about it. But of course, money always matters, and this full moon might really emphasize, how much it does matter. And so, don't sweep things under the carpet. And if you feel something needs to be said, well, then just say it. And you're helped by the fact that the moon in Sagittarius is making a trine to Mars, which is your ruler. So that moon trine Mars is really going to help you, be dynamic and be powerful, and perhaps bring up difficult subjects, but you can do it in a very direct way. It might catch people unawares, but when you bring up the subject, you'll get a response. And it might be that you can force things through, or get people to discuss difficult subjects. So that's one way in which moon trine Mars could be working. Or you can start the discussion. You say what's important, and people just have to respond. Because at the moment, Scorpio, there is something about you that actually is quite compelling. Now, Mars doesn't just receive a trine from the moon. It actually is actually in trine to Chiron, and this Chiron trine has been around for a couple of days, but the moon is bringing it all together. And so, with this grand trine in fire signs, Scorpio, it could be challenging, and the reason it could be challenging is because you may actually have to move to center stage. You might not want to move to center stage, but it's like someone has to say it, someone has to maybe state the obvious, and at the same time your fundamental individuality is screaming for expression. And so the person you are needs to be revealed, maybe. Chiron may insist on it. And it's not that you have to cause chaos. It's about your sense of order. And your sense of order may be different from other people's sense of order, but it matters to you, and you need to reveal it. And if it inconveniences other people, well, that really can't be helped, can it? So don't underestimate yourself, Scorpio. And you're someone who, at the moment, you really can make things happen. And you might not make friends making things happen. You might get criticism, maybe not direct criticism, but people will be thinking that you're being unreasonable. But again, it doesn't matter, because at the moment you've got something to contribute, and if people don't like it, well, again, that can't be helped, Scorpio. So put yourself in the forefront of things, and don't do anything you don't want to do. And additionally, the financial element may underpin a lot of things, and if something isn't being said regarding money, then it may be your job to actually say it, and you'll be saving yourself and perhaps a lot of other people a load of trouble. Sagittarius. Moon is still moving through your sign, and actually we have a grand trine in fire signs. And so you've got grand trine in fire signs. Well, that's very dynamic, very active. This grand trine, you've got Moon in Sagittarius, trine Mars in Leo, trine Chiron in Aries. And so you are perhaps at the center of things, and you can initiate lots of different things, and you can make things happen. And additionally, the moon in Sagittarius is of course in mutual reception to Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler, and it's in Cancer, and so with the moon being in mutual reception to Jupiter, that makes you strong, it makes you effective, and you in most cases can act in a way that that is fortunate and is well considered, and you can get results. So what would you like to happen? How would you like today to run its course? Because it can happen in your way, and that can be problematic sometimes, if other people don't like what you're doing. But if it's important to you, then you just have to go for it, and be an individual. And and a lot of it is that Chiron energy. Chiron energy. You want to do something different. You've got a unique contribution. You've got a unique skill set, and you've got a unique perspective. And people need to know about it. And this perspective might also be about a particular stance regarding human pain and suffering. So you might feel very aware that there is suffering going on, that someone is in trouble, that someone needs to be helped, and other people might not be bothered, but you are bothered. And in the right circumstances, you're able to really make a stand on another person's behalf, and so you can actually be quite an advocate for another person. You may actually find yourself defending another person's interests, because it is a matter of right and wrong. And Sagittarius is a sign that actually is very, very moral, and so you can create a moral dimension to the day that other people just miss. And elsewhere, we do have a sextile between Mercury and Venus, and that Mercury-Venus sextile is not so much about you, but it might be about another person. Mercury sextile Venus is an aspect which is about talent, and someone perhaps wanting to express their talent and in their own way, show what they can do, show what they can contribute. And this kind of person is, it's easy to just forget them, or just to, not listen to them properly. But you can listen, and you don't have to do everything yourself. There are people out there who are very clever, very talented, and you do need to listen to what they say. And they're not going to say it in a very obvious way, because you're quite high energy at the moment, and there's some danger if you're too high energy that other people don't feel that they can express themselves. So slow things down a little, especially when dealing with another person you care about. See what they've got to say, and when you actually listen to what they say, then you might realize that they're saying something important that you need to take into account. Capricorn, you're at the moment very charismatic. You do have real charm, and it doesn't matter where you are. People notice you, and if you try to make an impression, even if you think that there's no point, you'll definitely be making an impact, and people will in fact give you the benefit of the doubt, because you have charm and charisma. Your words are going to have added impact. So if there's anything you want to say, then say it. And if you want to get people onto your side, I think your chances of being successful are very high. And one reason might be because you are quite grounded. Other people are sort of zooming around from place to place, and they're not quite sure where they're going, but you're always grounded, and you're able to provide some Capricorn stability. And also you can do it in a way that is charismatic. People are prepared to stop and listen to what you are saying, because you've got stuff to say that is important. And in most cases, people are just going to just accept it. And things are going to get better. Now, if you're in the Americas, then then this evening the moon actually moves into Capricorn. It moves into your sign. Okay, if you're in sort of Europe or Asia, Australasia, the moon won't move into Capricorn until tomorrow, but still it will get there. And so if you're an American Capricorn, then this evening, keep going. Keep trying to spread your influence, and you may find that you're actually really quite successful over the course of the evening. And you can at the same time be quite tough, because when the moon moves into Capricorn, it straight away makes a square to Saturn. And so you're certainly not someone to be underestimated. And that moon square Saturn means that you can be very clear about what matters. And I think that people will listen. And you can be tough. And that, I think, is welcome. And also, Capricorn, you don't actually have to be in the center of things today to be noticed. You don't actually have to make an effort. You can just be yourself. You can do what's important, and just everything will just naturally come together. And so that means really that you don't have to try too hard. So make the most of the day, and make the most of the day without exhausting yourself. You don't have to exhaust yourself. There's a lot of energy today, but let other people exhaust themselves. Let other people be the energizers, be the active parties. Then you can just watch, and in the end, certainly by this evening, if you're in the Americas, when things have started to calm down, you'll realize that actually you're in a good position, and you probably hold most of the cards. Aquarius, there is a Sagittarius full moon today, and this full moon may raise issues of independence. How independent are you? How much are you able to do things your way without reference to other people? And it is difficult, perhaps very difficult, to get the balance right. And with this full moon, you're very aware of what you want to do, what you would like to be doing, and you're also aware of the social pressure. And different Aquarians may respond to this in different ways. I mean, some Aquarians might decide that they need to put other people first. Others might decide that your own individuality is everything. And so, try not to be an extremist. You do have to consider things from all points of view, and ideally, you will be doing what is important to you. But at the same time, you will be taking into account the fact that you do live in a social universe, and other people, to some extent, have to be accommodated. And while you're negotiating these kind of issues, you are at the moment very, very charming. There's something about you that is appealing. People are going to like you, and you're going to be attractive, or certainly sort of more attractive than usual, and you can sort of perhaps leverage this attractiveness. And attractiveness has many forms. It may be the way you present yourself, it might be the way you speak, the way you communicate, but you can really have a powerful impact just because of who you are and almost your aura. So do take advantage of that, and just because things seem to be difficult, people seem to be unappreciative, they don't seem to recognize you. it's not true. As soon as you make an effort, and I don't think you have to make much of an effort, you will find that things really really start to move. And additionally, going back to what I was talking about in terms of who you are, what you're good at, it is a day in which you can really build on this, because there is a sextile between Mercury and Venus, and this Mercury-Venus sextile could just allow you to work on things in your own way, and you don't necessarily always need other people's help or advice. You don't have to feel that anyone's looking over looking over your shoulder, seeing what you're doing. That's not true, and you will actually have quite a good sense of detail. In fact, looking at the whole period between now and the end of June next year, over the next year, June 26. Your sense of detail probably will be quite good. You might have convinced yourself that you don't have a good sense of detail, that you're not necessarily too good at the small things that have to be got right, but that's not actually true. And if you do aim for perfection, I mean, not in an obsessive way, but if you do aim for perfection, then actually it's a time when you can actually find that perfection. And this sextile between Mercury and Venus may allow you to do something in a way that is very private, and you work on it, you're undisturbed, and the results really can be quite amazing. Now, one of the big events of today is a grand trine between Moon, Mars, and Chiron. And this Moon, Mars, Chiron trine does strike me as being quite sociable. And I know that with the full moon there is an issue of how sociable you want to be, but if you handle things correctly, then I think that with this grand trine, you can get noticed, and you can be super sociable. And as I've just said, there is an attractiveness that you have that is just quite natural and is quite obvious. So you make an effort to be sociable, be with people, and things can happen, and you don't have to compromise anything. And people will listen to you, and there will be real dynamism. It's not that you're just going to get your way the whole time. There will be other people to consider. There'll be other views to consider. But I think that you actually will appreciate that dynamism, and it could actually make you feel quite alive. So, if possible, Aquarius, do try to spend time today with other people, because I think you can really benefit each other. Pisces, don't forget the moon is still in Sagittarius, and that the moon is in mutual reception with Jupiter. Moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs. Now, moon might move out of Sagittarius this evening if you're in the Americas, but for most people, the moon is pretty much going to be in Sagittarius all day. And so with the moon being in mutual reception to Jupiter, and the moon being in the high profile part of your chart, and of course Jupiter's in Cancer now, your ruler is very strongly placed in Cancer. I think it's a Wednesday where you can be very effective, and you can make things happen. And if you want to create changes, then you can. If, for example, you are not happy with the way things are going, then you really can create change. You don't have to be satisfied with anything. So, if you feel unhappy about something, or if you feel that things are being planned that you don't approve of, you can step in and really change things. And we can't forget that there is a full moon today, moon in Sagittarius and sun in Sun in Gemini. Now, this full moon certainly emphasizes your ambitions, what you are trying to achieve, but the moon is opposition the sun. And so this moon opposition the sun, might remind you that, however ambitious you are, whatever your aims, you've got to consider your starting point. You have a starting point. You move away from this starting point. Perhaps you go on a mission. You are successful on your mission. You create lines of supply, if you want to use a military analogy. But you have to remember that starting point. Because if you move too far away from that starting point, you may just lose touch with everything, and all of your gains might be for nothing. And so this full moon might just be a gentle reminder that you have to think about your roots and what is important to you, and you've got to look at your aims and contrast them with who you are and what is important to you, because it is important to be grounded. Now, hopefully you will have learnt that lesson over the last year. So Jupiter was in Gemini for a year. I mean, it's now out of Cancer, now out of Gemini, and it's in Cancer, and it won't be in Gemini for another 11 years. And so perhaps those lessons are now starting to make sense for you with this full moon. And the shadow of Jupiter in Gemini may suddenly manifest with this full moon, and you'll start to realize that you can't go too far without making sure that your lines of supply, that your logistics, your emotional logistics are all in order. So overall, Pisces, I do think it's a day when you can really accomplish quite a lot, and it's still important for you to be responsible and to understand your limitations. Everyone's got limitations, but if you perhaps you have to take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, just make sure everything's in order, make sure you haven't made mistakes, make sure you hadn't forgotten something, and you take that approach, you're still making progress. You're making progress all the time. So with that kind of attitude, I think it could be actually quite a successful day. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 53, which is development. It's about slow improvement. It's not about fast development, transformational development. It's not like that. It's just slowly moving forward. And the I Ching, when looking at this hexagram, it likes to use the image of a goose or some bird, and the bird is going higher and higher and higher as it goes through its flight. And we've got 6 moving lines, and we can see where we are on that flight path, if you like. And some of those lines are fortunate, others not so fortunate. And we do have the first line moving, the third line moving, and the 6th line moving. And the first line moving is really the very beginning of the flight, and that might be how it feels to be at the beginning of the day. And you're making progress, you're starting to make progress, but you don't know the rules. You don't fully understand what's going on. And a secondary image would be of the child or the young adult trying to make their way in life right at the beginning. They don't know the rules, and they're in danger of making mistakes. So it could be the mistakes of inexperience, So to begin with, really be very, very careful and don't take on too much, and you do understand your limitations. Then the third line moves, and the third line is often a problem line, and the third line could be about ploughing on regardless. You feel that you have to, that you can do it, and you might overdo it. That is a possibility, and that might be linked with the fact there's a full moon. A full moon, things have gone as far as they can, and you realize, hopefully, that you've gone too far, and perhaps in the process you're breaking some of the rules. There are rules that have to be followed, conventions that have to be followed, but in your hurry you might sort of break those conventions and get yourself into trouble. So at the first sign of trouble, it's important to pull back, not to take things too far. And then the sixth line moves. Now, the sixth line is it's one of those lines in the I Ching that I do associate with death. And I don't mean death in a real sense. I'm not talking about anyone dying. But sort of death as in some kind of transformation. And what the I Ching says is that the goose, it goes higher and higher and higher, and in the end it reaches the absolute limits. It's transcending into something else because it's just gone so far. And then it talks about the feathers of the geese, and so what is left of the goose? The goose is gone. All that's left is these feathers which flutter down to earth. And what do people do with these feathers? So people find these feathers and they create sort of costumes with them, or they use them for ceremonial dances. And what is a ceremonial dance about? And in a way, it's about honouring the goose. The goose has reached the limits; it's reached a peak it's gone. But all that's left is its feathers. So that is why I associate this line with death. Maybe I'm wrong to associate it with death, but if you look at it from the goose's point of view, then you have transcended. The goose has become a heavenly being, and of course this is just a hexagram for one day, and it might be that in the end, after a lot of trials and tribulations, you're trying to get something done, you actually make it, and you do something that's really good, and it can be an example to other people. Maybe it's not just what you're doing, it's you yourself are developing. And if you get over these pitfalls, I have talked about these pitfalls, starting too early, going too far, but in the end you understand what needs to be done, and the sixth line, you really do achieve something, and you're gone because you've moved to a new level. That could be a way of looking at it. So you've got three lines moving, and that does move to a second hexagram. And that hexagram is number 3. Hexagram number 3, difficulty at the beginning. So this is kind of strange because the second hexagram represents the second state, and we'd expect difficulty at the beginning to be the first state. So it's like this development that we're going through, it represents a preparation. We're preparing for something else. We're preparing for a transition. So having gone through this process of development, which at times was difficult, but it looks like we will in the end make it, and we make it very well. We do a good job, and we're ready for that transition. We make that transition, but then difficulty at the beginning. So we are starting something or preparing for something, and once that new thing actually starts, straight away it's not easy. And so it's possible, by the end of the day, that things may be tough, that it may be difficult to get things done, and there may be unexpected hurdles, and our first inclination might be to just give up, or just to ask, have we got something wrong? But no, we haven't got anything wrong. Difficulty at the beginning in many respects is quite a fortunate hexagram, because it tells us where the difficulties are. And additionally, difficulty at the beginning indicates that help may be at hand. So if we run into issues, then we can get outside help. So whatever problems we face or we start to face, at the end of the day, it might be the end of the day. I mean, perhaps I'm being overly chronological in reading this this I Ching, but we will be able to resolve these problems. So don't give up, even if by the end of the day you might be involved in something that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It is a temporary state, and we're just dealing with just a few early teething problems, and soon enough it will resolve. I mean, not of its own accord, but through your own actions you'll be able to sort things out. And so now I want to finish by looking at the full moon. So we've got a full moon today, and it's in Sagittarius, and so let's see what this full moon is about. So here's the full moon. So I've set this to Washington DC. Normally I start by setting my full moons for London. This time I've set it for Washington DC. So this full moon, I make it as being at 3:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's going to be a bit earlier if you're in California. In fact, it might be late on Tuesday if you're in Hawaii, for example, or Alaska. So here's the chart of the full moon, and there is the moon at 2039 Sagittarius. There's a sun at 2039 Gemini, and so this full moon week, we can say the usual things about this full moon, and it is about the contrast between Gemini and Sagittarius. On the surface, Gemini and Sagittarius are quite similar signs. They have a reputation for making a lot of noise, for being quite sort of talkative, and certainly positive. Well, of course, Gemini and Sagittarius are both positive signs. One is fire, one is earth, but there is a difference of emphasis. Sagittarius is a sign that is more about the broad picture, whereas Gemini is more about the details, small things. I mean, that's not to say that Geminis are in themselves petty, but if we're just trying to contrast Gemini and Sagittarius, that is the contrast. So, we might have Sun in Gemini looking at things in a very fragmented way, and we're trying to fit the pieces together, and we're just interested in lots of facts, lots of information. But then the challenge with Sagittarius is to see the big picture. How does it all fit together? And that's what you've got to do, and you've got to bring it all together and make it into something. So that is the challenge. And with Sagittarius, moon in Sagittarius, I know that in terms of the tarot cards, moon in Sagittarius, it's linked with one of the wands, but you can also with one of the suits of wands. I forget which one. I think it's it's Nine of Wands, isn't it? That certainly in the Crowley deck is connected with moon and Sagittarius. I might be wrong on that one, but Sagittarius in general can be associated with temperance. That tarot card, temperance, and temperance is about, if you look at the Crowley deck, you can see this angelic figure with a cauldron putting things together. It's about alchemy, and so the alchemy of this full moon is to take all that, the details, the facts that Gemini has brought together, which is an important process. You need to have the facts, and then turning it into something else, and that happens through an alchemical process, bringing everything together. And seeing the big picture. Okay, we may not reach the philosopher's stone if it's alchemy, but we still can understand the truth. It might be our subjective truth, but it's difficult to say, what is the truth. But truth may be an element of this full moon, and just seeing it for what it really is, and accepting the truth, and that is always important. Now, as far as the specific features of this full moon are concerned, what makes it different, what makes it special? Well, this full moon is connected with Venus. That might not seem obvious, but Venus is at 5 degrees 9 Taurus, so Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to the moon, and so what the moon touches by hard aspect, Venus will also touch. So there is a Venusian feel to this full moon. And so if you think about Venus, well, that might be about relating. And the challenge here with this full moon is to relate to people in the right way. Now, if you take the sort of Uranian school, the midpoint schools of astrology, they would say, well, it doesn't really matter whether it's a sesquiquadrate, a conjunction, a square. The point is, this full moon is connected with Venus, so it just has a Venus feel to it. It is about relating. You could also say, though, it's a sesquiquadrate, and it could therefore be about the challenge to relate. How do we do that? And how do we do that when there may be so many obstacles? And so that's something we have to bridge. Venus, you could say, is the planet of war, the planet of victory. And so there could be actually something quite warlike about this full moon. And, this full moon is kind of trine Mars, but Venus also has a link there. And so people looking for victory, seeing war as a solution, but the challenge is, how do you actually find a solution with war? Can you really find victory? And there are certainly parts of the world where this full moon could be particularly applicable in that sense. Now, if we look at the full moon from the viewpoint of the 90-degree dial, in other words, if we create the fourth harmonic of this full moon. So remember, this full moon, putting it on a 90-degree dial, conjunctions, squares, oppositions, they all show as conjunctions. Semi-squares and sesquiquadrates show as oppositions. So let's start by putting the full moon on the dial. See, there's the full moon. You see, the sun and the moon are together because it's an opposition, and oppositions show as conjunctions here. So, and there's Venus. You see, it's making a semi-square sesquiquadrate to Venus. So that Venus shows up as an opposition. And what we're looking at is the midpoints, and we can't help but notice the fact that Hades is configured. Hades Hades is a planet I do use, and Hades is a planet of things that are filthy, criminal, destructive. It may also represent stagnation, and Mars and Uranus are starting to move towards a square with each other. And so what's happening is that this Mars-Uranus square, which is shown as a conjunction because squares show up as a conjunction on the 90-degree dial, is creating a symmetry with Hades. And so the new moon is picking up on is on the midpoint of Mars Hades and also of Uranus Hades. And so that does give the full moon a certain unpleasantness, and it's not just the fact that the new moon is that the full moon is on that midpoint. Also, Venus is on that midpoint as well, and so that is an aspect of this full moon which maybe isn't quite so pleasant. And it might be quite destructive, and it is about people doing bad things, and that could be about conflict. It could be about internal conflict, and it could be about what's going on in America. I mean, I'm going to talk about the riots briefly just in a moment, but this 90-degree dial is set for Washington DC, so I'm therefore able to look at the ascendant and the midheaven. So remember, this full moon is aspecting the ascendant midheaven midpoint in Washington DC. This is not a general feature of the full moon. This is only a feature of this full moon set for Washington DC, and so full moon aspecting the sun and the moon on the ascendant midheaven midpoint, that may tell us straight away this is an important lunation. It affects, Washington DC is the capital of the United States. It's the federal capital, and this full moon is on the Mars Hades and also on the Uranus Hades midpoint. So there is potentially something difficult going on in the US that we need to be thinking about. But I'll come back to that. And I wanted to look at another place which might be impacted by the full moon, and that's Delhi, the capital of India. So this full moon. Okay, there's a sun moon opposition, and so you've got Jupiter on the midheaven. If you set the full moon, if you set the full moon for Delhi, and you have got on the descendant, you've got the Saturn Neptune conjunction is on the descendant, and so it's a kind of a mixed picture. You could say that set for India, the midheaven is on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint. So from the viewpoint of the sort of the Indian government, that might be the message that the Indian government is trying to present. The Indian government will have a lot to say for itself, maybe internally. I mean, Indian politics is complicated, so I don't fully know what's going on internally, but it's also about what it's saying to the world at large. And I know that Pakistan is often a problem for India, and China is a problem for India. I know that Russia is trying to bring India and China together, trying to create some rapport between these two nations. And so that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, I mean, looks quite good for India. But on the other hand, we've got Neptune on the descendant, and we've got Saturn on the descendant. And that Saturn-Neptune conjunction taking, which is around, been around for some time, but the fact that it's on the descendant at the same time as the full moon is exact may say something about India's enemies. Of course, one normally, with India's enemies, one really thinks about Pakistan. It doesn't. I mean, China, you could say, is an enemy, but not at the same level as Pakistan. So, I think China is more a rival, and so that Saturn Neptune on the descendant may not be particularly pleasant, and it may say something about tension between India and its neighbours, or its neighbours trying to work in a way that is subtle but undermining. I mean, I hope that doesn't relate to a terrorist attack. We don't know to what extent Pakistan was involved in that terrorist attack in where was it, Pahalgam in Kashmir. So there is potentially something going on which the Indian government needs to be aware of. And okay, for the sake of balance, let me just redo the full moon chart for the capital of Pakistan, for Islamabad. I don't think if you set this chart for Islamabad, the full moon is quite so dramatic. Well, in fact, it is actually. So it's very different. It's very difficult to actually distinguish sometimes between Pakistan and India astrologically, it's like with Britain and France. And London and Paris are very close to one another. So with astrocartography, you often see the same thing going on in Paris as you do in London. And, likewise here, if we're setting the chart for Islamabad, the capital of India, again, Jupiter's on the midheaven. Jupiter's exactly on the midheaven. And Saturn is very close to the descendant. So as both countries, Mercury, Jupiter on the midheaven, both countries have got a lot to say, and both countries may perhaps be undermining each other. And one hopes that this doesn't lead to war or new conflict, but this is a part of the world that I'm thinking might be affected by this lunation. And then there is what's going on in the US and Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump has got his birthday coming up. And I did want to have a video talking about his birthday and talking about his returns. I think his birthday is on the 14th. So that would be, I think his birthday is on Saturday. And so this full moon is taking place just before his birthday. And so we've got Moon in Sagittarius, Sun in Gemini. And of course, if we look at Donald Trump's chart, he has this. He has Moon in Sagittarius and Sun in Gemini. So if we put those charts side by side, the fact that he's got this full moon in his chart, and there's this full moon which mirrors his chart. I think this full moon is probably going to be very important for Trump in terms of some of his decisions, and he also could be realizing certain things. There are conclusions that he is reaching. Some things may be being obvious. He may be starting to see the truth about some of his activities, both at home and abroad. I mean, obviously he's making a big thing about his crackdown on illegal immigrants. And of course we have these sort of riots in Los Angeles where ICE agents are being sort of protested against, and there's a lot of sort of tear gas and there's threats running around. Trump is doing his normal stuff, saying in his opinion, Gavin Newsom should be arrested, and I think people take that at face value. I mean, one shouldn't always take what Donald Trump says at face value. It's a kind of a metaphorical, symbolic thing he's saying. So I don't think that one should jump to the conclusion that he's a tyrant just because he is speculated about it might be a nice thing for Gavin Newsom to be arrested. But I mean, some people, for their own reasons, like to take Donald Trump completely literally at his word. And still, this full moon is on his nodal axis. You can see that the moon is conjunct his south node, and the south node and the sun is conjunct his north node. And that may actually be interesting when we realize that Donald Trump has Kalasapa yoga. And Kalasapa yoga, when you've got all the planets on one side of the nodal axis, okay, you could say that the moon is not on the right side to have Kalasapa yoga. But I mean, I've gone into this, and it might relate to whether you use a true or the mean node, whether you use houses, whole signs to distinguish between whether or not someone has Kalasapa yoga. But I don't want to go into details, but as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump does have Kalasapa yoga. And born at literally the time of the snake, and things just happen if you've got Kalasapa yoga. And I think that that aspect of his life, that the Kalasapa yoga thing, is really manifests with this full moon. And so the next couple of weeks, could be quite hectic for Trump. And okay, we've already seen what's happening in Los Angeles. It may say something also about what's happening to America with its overseas adventures and activities. For example, in Ukraine, what is going on with Ukraine? How does America actually see it? And full moon, he sees it for what it is. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about this full moon and about what it means for Trump, simply because I want to look in detail at his birthday in a few days' time. But I do think of it is an important full moon. And his adversary, supposedly, is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. And here is Gavin Newsom's chart. So Gavin Newsom has a midheaven at 2007 Gemini, his Mars at 2053 Sagittarius, and in fact it's all linked up with Pluto. So Gavin Newsom has Mars square Pluto, and that Mars square Pluto is on the ascendant, and Mars is on the IC. So this full moon actually has a huge impact on Gavin Newsom. I mean, more so than Trump. And is it going to be good for Gavin Newsom? Now, probably if you're a Democrat in California, you're thinking, oh, this is great. I mean, Gavin Newsom is getting lots of attention. He's standing up to the tyrannical president, bold words and so on. But is that really how it's going to work? Not necessarily. This full moon, sure, it's on his midheaven, but it's on his Mars, and so it certainly activates him. It activates his Mars, and Mars on the IC can be very defensive, and it's hitting his Pluto. So it's quite possible that Gavin Newsom, with this full moon, does overplay his hand. And Gavin Newsom should not necessarily assume that the way things are working out in Los Angeles is necessarily in his favor. How are ordinary Americans, how is the silent majority responding to all of this? And it's quite possible that from a polling perspective, this is not helping him. It may actually be working in Trump's favor. So the Democrats shouldn't be too excited by what is going on in Los Angeles. And someone else who could be affected by this full moon, I'm going to be very quick on this, is Jourdain Bardella, connected with the National Rally, the sort of right-wing party in France. And Jourdain Bardella has his ascendant at 21-24 Sagittarius, and so this full moon is right on his ascendant, and he's got his sun here. He's got a Sun-Saturn opposition. So that's a major configuration here that Jourdain Bardella has: Sun opposition Saturn, and it's square his ascendant, and the full moon is coming right across it. So I would have thought the next couple of weeks could be quite difficult for Jourdain Bardella. Sorry, let me pronounce that right. Jourdain Bardella. Is that right? Anyway, this full moon, it does hit him, and I think it could be difficult. I think there could be real challenges for him. And he's always got to deal with Mitterrand and Mitterrand's machinations, and there could be pressure within the party. A new challenge that he has to deal with. And finally, there is the British King, King Charles III. So King Charles III has his Mars at 20 degrees Sagittarius. So the full moon is right on his Mars, and his Mars is he's got Mars semi-square the South Node and Mercury, and so I'm not convinced that this full moon is going to be particularly easy. I mean, he's got this, maybe his Mars in his sidereal fourth house, sorry, his Placidus fourth house, although his whole sign fifth house. I mean, that could be say something about him and Harry, him and his children, but you know, this full moon may say something about his health, because you know Mars is his planet. It's a male planet, and it's under pressure with this full moon, and so it could be a difficult time for him. I mean, I hope everything's fine, and because we do know he's been ill, and so he may come to a realization with this full moon about what he can and what he cannot do. So that's it. That's the full moon. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.